They tell you the hardest part of working the graveyard shift in an ER is just the exhaustion. That bone-deep weariness that sinks in around 3 a.m. when the whole city is asleep but you're stuck under mercilessly bright fluorescent lights. They say it's the endless parade of human misery, the accidents, the tragedies, the lives that just slip away no matter what you do. They're wrong. The hardest part is when the halls go quiet and you start hearing whispers. And the chilling part? Realizing not all of them are coming from the patients you can see. I used to be a skeptic, probably just like you. I'm a man of science, a nurse. I believe in charts, in observable facts. But one very long, very dark night in that hospital taught me that the dead have stories to tell, and the living have secrets they will absolutely kill to keep. My name is Leo. 2 years ago, I was a traveling nurse. It was a sweet gig, see the country, help people, make good money. The agency sent me to St. Jude's Mercy Hospital, this sprawling place that was a weird mix of old and new. The main lobby and the surgical wing were all shiny and 21st century, but the ER, my new home, was part of the original building from the 1950s. The floors were worn linoleum, the walls were this pale, sickly green, and the whole place just seemed to hum with the ghosts of old machines and forgotten crises. I was on the night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., the graveyard shift, and for the first few weeks, it was exactly what I signed up for. Controlled chaos, late-night car wrecks, fevers that spike after midnight, and lonely people with nowhere else to turn. You learn pretty fast to survive on stale coffee and a dark sense of humor. I made some work friends. There was Mike, the security guard, a big ex-cop whose face looked like it lost a fight with a bag of wrenches. He was cynical about pretty much everything. And then there was Sarah, a career ER nurse. She'd been at St. Jude's for over 30 years. She had kind eyes, but the wrinkles around them told stories of things she'd seen that she could never unsee. Sarah was the first one to hint at the hospital's reputation. It wasn't a big conversation, just little comments in the break room, things I was clearly meant to overhear. Staff would talk about the flickers in the West Hall, or the weeper in the old pediatric ward, now just a storage area. I'd roll my eyes. Every old building has ghost stories. It's just a way to cope with the stress of a place so familiar with death. Don't let them put you in 13, a tech mumbled to me one night while wheeling a patient out. I looked over at the bay he'd nodded at. Bed 13. It was at the far end of the trauma bay, kind of isolated. It looked just like every other bed. A gurney, a monitor, an IV stand. But I realized it was always empty. The bed was always made, but it was never ever used. An unspoken rule. I asked Sarah about it during a rare quiet moment. So what's the deal with bed 13? She was restocking a crash cart, her hands moving on autopilot. She didn't even look at me when she answered, and her voice dropped. It's just glitchy. The call light goes off by itself. Bad wiring. Admin's been meaning to fix it for years. I knew she was lying. Or at least, leaving a lot out. I could see the tension in her shoulders. Bad wiring? That's it? That's the big scary story? I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. Sarah finally stopped and met my eyes. The kindness was gone, replaced by this deep, profound weariness. Just stay away from it, Leo. Some things in this place are better left alone. The wiring is the least of its problems. She turned and walked off, leaving me standing there. A cold draft curled around my ankles, which made no sense in the stuffy, recycled air of the ER. I shrugged it off. Glitchy wiring, superstitious nurses. I had real patients to save. I was a man of medicine. I didn't have time for ghost stories. I had no idea that I was about to become the main character in the darkest story St. Jude's had ever told. The calm was over, and the storm that was coming would rip my understanding of reality to shreds. The night it all really started was a Tuesday. Tuesdays were usually slow. The weekend's bad decisions had worn off, and the midweek mayhem hadn't kicked in yet. The waiting room was empty. Mike was half watching a game at the security desk, Sarah was catching up on charts, and I was doing my rounds. The silence was thick, broken only by the steady beeping of monitors. That's when I heard it. A single, faint ding. I looked up at the main board. A light was flashing. Bed 13. I froze. Sarah's warning rang in my ears. I glanced at her. She was staring at the board, her face pale. Mike looked up from his TV with a frown. "Told you they need to fix that damn thing," he grumbled, looking back at the game. But I couldn't ignore it. A call light is a call light. Protocol. It was probably a short circuit. "I've got it," I said, my voice way too loud in the quiet room. Sarah looked at me, her eyes screaming a warning. "Leo, just leave it. It'll stop." "It's my job, Sarah," I shot back, trying to sound casual. "Can't have faulty equipment. What if we actually need the bed tonight?" Walking down the long bay toward that empty alcove, I felt that classic prickling on the back of my neck. The air got colder with every step. Not just cool, but a damp, cellar-like cold that had no business being in a climate-controlled hospital. Bed 13 was just as I'd always seen it, pristine and empty. The call light button on the wall was glowing. I reached out and hit the cancel button. The light on the board went out. The dinging stopped. Silence. I waited a second. Nothing. I ran my hand over the mattress. It was cold to the touch, unnaturally cold, like a marble slab. I checked the wiring behind the panel. Everything looked fine. I dismissed it as a fluke and headed back. Sarah wouldn't meet my eye. She just gave her head a slow, silent shake that screamed, "I told you so." An hour passed. It was still quiet. I was in the west corridor, heading for a cup of coffee. This was the older part of the ER connecting to radiology. The lights here were known to flicker. It was an old staff joke. But this was different. As I walked, the temperature plunged. It wasn't gradual. It was like walking through an invisible wall into a meat locker. The air got so cold I could see my breath. I stopped dead, my own breath hanging in a white cloud in front of my face. My heart hammered. I looked around. Alone. No flickering lights. I touched the wall. It was frigid. I looked for an air vent, thinking maybe a duct was pumping in freezing air. Nothing. The cold was just there. A 10-foot section of hallway. I took 2 steps forward and, just as suddenly as I'd entered it, I was out. The air was warm again. I turned back, staring at the empty hall. It looked completely normal, but I could still feel the chill clinging to my scrubs. I hurried to the lounge, my heart pounding. I didn't get coffee. I just stood there, trying to make sense of it. A sudden pocket of intense cold inside a sealed building? My scientific mind was scrambling. Freon leak? Bizarre pressure drop? Nothing made sense. I didn't say a word to anyone. They already saw me as the curious new guy. Telling them I saw my breath in the haunted hallway would just get me labeled as crazy. I tried to bury it, to focus on my work, but the foundation of my skepticism had a crack in it. My logical, reasonable world was starting to feel thin, and something cold and unexplainable was seeping through. The night bled on, and I was on edge. Every normal hospital sound, a distant cough, the squeak of a wheel, seemed sinister. I was jumpy, and Sarah noticed. She kept giving me these worried looks but didn't say anything, which was almost worse. Around 2:30 a.m., the intercom crackled. It was Mike. His voice, usually a bored drone, was tight. "Sarah, Leo, you guys hearing that?" I hadn't been, but now I listened. Faintly, through the speaker, I could hear it. The sound of a kid, crying, high-pitched and heartbroken. "Where's that coming from, Mike?" Sarah asked. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white on the counter. "Sounds like the old PED's wing," he said. "But that's impossible. It's been shut down for renovations for a month. It's empty." The weeping grew louder, an inconsolable, gut-wrenching sound that scraped at my nerves. It was a sound that didn't belong. "Checking the cameras now," Mike said, his voice strained. A few seconds passed, filled only by that disembodied sobbing. Nothing. Hallways are empty. And just as he said it, the crying stopped. It didn't fade out. It cut off. The silence that came after was heavier than the sound itself. "False alarm, I guess," Mike said, with zero conviction. Nobody bought it. We all heard it. A child crying in a deserted wing of the hospital. I felt a cold dread pool in my stomach. This wasn't a glitch anymore. My fear was about to get a whole lot more real. I was coming back from the supply closet with fresh linens. The main bay was dead quiet. As I walked past a line of empty gurneys against the wall, I saw it. Movement. Just a flicker in my peripheral vision. I stopped and turned. One of the gurneys, which had been parked against the wall, was now rolling silently into the middle of the corridor. It moved about 5 feet, its wheels making absolutely no sound, and then just stopped. I stared, my mouth dry. My first thought was the floor was sloped, but it wasn't. And a gurney doesn't just start rolling and then stop on a dime. I walked over, my footsteps echoing. I knelt and checked the wheels. All 4 were locked. It would have taken a hard, deliberate push to move it. I looked around. The bay was empty except for sleeping patients behind curtains. The nurse's station was 50 feet away. Nobody was here. Something had moved that gurney. That's when the ambulance call came in. A John Doe, found unconscious in an alley. No ID. He was my patient. We got him into bed 7. I took his vitals, drew blood, and hooked him up to a monitor. He was stable, just out cold. I noticed a simple, old-fashioned anchor tattoo on his wrist. My supervisor, Dr. Evans, a guy who cared more about paperwork than patients, gave him a quick look. "Just another drunk," he said dismissively. "Keep an eye on him. I don't want him tying up a bed all night." About 20 minutes later, I needed a specific catheter from the supply closet down the hall. I told Sarah I'd be right back. I was gone for 90 seconds, tops. When I got back to bed 7, the man was gone. The bed was empty, sheets thrown back, but he was gone. My first thought, he woke up. He's in the bathroom. "Sir?" I called, ripping back the curtain to the little lavatory. Empty. Panic started to bubble up. I scanned the entire ER. No sign of him. A 180-pound man in a hospital gown can't just walk out unnoticed. "Sarah! Mike!" I yelled. "My John Doe from bed 7. He's gone." Chaos. Mike got on the radio, alerting all security. Sarah and I swept the whole department. Nothing. Dr. Evans stormed out of his office, his face a mask of pure annoyance. "What's the meaning of this, Leo? You lost a patient?" "He was right here," I said frantically. "I was gone for 2 minutes." As I spoke, I glanced at the floor next to the bed, and I saw it. The plastic hospital wristband we'd put on him, lying on the floor, snipped clean through. I picked it up. "See? He was here. This is his." Mike rushed back from the security office, his face grim. "I've checked every camera, Dr. Evans, every exit. No one matching his description left this hospital. No one's even been near an exit in the last 20 minutes. Dr. Evans turned to me, his eyes cold. He took the wristband from me, then he looked back. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, nurse, but there is no record of this patient ever being admitted." "What? That's insane. I took his blood. The lab has it. I charted his vitals." Evans walked to the computer. He typed for a moment, then turned the screen towards me. "Show me. Show me where you charted this John Doe." I stared at the screen. Bed 7 was listed as open. My charting was gone. His admission record, it just wasn't there. It was as if he had never existed. "No, that's impossible," I stammered, my mind spinning. "The system, something's wrong." Dr. Evans looked at me with this condescending pity. "Leo, you've been working a lot of doubles. The graveyard shift can play tricks on your mind. You're exhausted, and you're hallucinating patients. We can't have that. It's a liability." I looked from his dismissive face to Sarah, who was watching with wide, scared eyes, to Mike, who just looked confused. They thought I was losing my mind. They were all telling me the man I had touched and treated was a figment of my imagination. But I wasn't crazy. I was being gaslit by the entire hospital. And that's when I had this horrifying thought. The man hadn't just vanished. He was erased. Evans's words just hung there in the air, thick and suffocating. "Go home, Leo. Get some rest. We'll talk about your fitness for duty tomorrow." He wasn't suggesting it. He was ordering me out. I was being dismissed, labeled unstable. The other nurses were now looking at me with a mix of pity and suspicion. My credibility was gone. I felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. My hands were shaking as I gathered my things from my locker. Maybe Evans was right. Maybe I was just exhausted, cracking up. Then it happened. It started with that same, single, insistent ding. Bed 13. Every head in the ER snapped toward the board. The light was flashing. But this time, it was joined by a deafening alarm. It wasn't just the call light. It was a code blue. The central cardiac monitor above the nurse's station switched to bed 13. Bright, jagged red lines spiked across the screen. Heart rate, 0. Blood pressure, 0/0. Respiration, 0. And in huge letters, ventricular fibrillation. A death rhythm. A patient was dying. But at the same time, the ventilator in bed 13's empty alcove roared to life. Its bellows started pumping, the screen lighting up, showing it was forcing air into lungs that weren't there. The entire staff was frozen solid, staring in disbelief. It was a textbook cardiac arrest happening in a completely empty bed. The hospital's own life-saving technology was responding to a patient that didn't exist. Dr. Evans, who had been watching me, saw the monitor and his face went white with fury. Not fear, rage. "Shut it down!" he roared, not at anyone, but at the machines themselves. "Shut that damn thing down now!" A few techs, running on pure instinct, moved for the crash cart. "Stop!" Evans barked. "Everyone stand down!" He stormed to the central monitor, trying to silence the alarm, but it wouldn't stop. The jagged red line continued its frantic, deadly dance. The ventilator kept breathing for a ghost. It was as if a phantom patient was desperately fighting for a life that was long gone, and the hospital's own systems were forced to help. Evans finally slammed his fist on the console. He spun around, his eyes locking on me. The calm administrator was gone. In his eyes, I saw something dark and cornered. "You," he seethed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This is your fault. You and your stirring things up." He strode over, his face inches from mine, his voice a venomous whisper. "This incident never happened. Do you understand me? The system had a catastrophic malfunction. That is the official report, and you are on administrative leave, effective immediately. Get out of my hospital." This wasn't just firing me. This was a threat. He was exiling me. As two security guards I'd never seen before started marching me toward the exit, I looked over at Sarah. She was pale as a sheet, her hand over her mouth. She looked terrified, but as our eyes met, she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, and her eyes flickered for a split second toward the dark corridor leading to the hospital's administrative basement. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a clue. The code blue alarm finally died as they shoved me out into the pre-dawn chill. I stood on the pavement, shaking in my scrubs. I hadn't just been fired. I'd been thrown out for seeing a truth this hospital would do anything to bury. The ghost of bed 13 wasn't just a lingering spirit, it was an accusation, and I now knew it was an accusation against the living. I didn't go home. I couldn't. Evans's rage, His desperate need to cover this up proved this wasn't just a haunting, it was a conspiracy. And Sarah's terrified glance toward the basement, it was a breadcrumb. I waited in the parking lot until the shift change, then slipped back in through a side delivery entrance. My keycard miraculously still worked. I followed Sarah's clue to a heavy fire door. Archives, authorized personnel only. The lock clicked open. The air was stale and cold, thick with the smell of old paper. I was in a sub-basement, a maze of shelves groaning under the weight of thousands of boxes. This was it, the entire history of the hospital, written in dusty medical records and forgotten files. I realized the official records would be scrubbed clean. Driven by a hunch, I explored the deeper, darker corners of the basement and found a section at the very back. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, except for one faint line, like something heavy had been dragged. At the far end, the wall looked wrong. I pushed against it and found a loose section, a panel of drywall disguised as concrete. My heart hammering, I pried it open. Behind it was a dark, cramped space, and inside, on the floor, was a single, black, metal footlocker, stenciled with faded white paint, decommissioned and sealed. I forced the rusted latches open. The screech of metal echoed in the silence. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside were not medical charts. They were journals, thin, leather-bound notebooks filled with spidery handwriting, and folders of unofficial notes. The name on the first page I saw sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Dr. Alistair Finch, Chief Trauma Surgeon, 1962 to 1978. So I sat there, on the floor of that dusty tomb, and I started to read. And that's when the true horror of St. Jude's Mercy finally revealed itself. Dr. Finch wasn't a surgeon. He was a monster. He was obsessed with the moment of death, with a theory he called ethereal severance. He believed that under extreme trauma, a measurable energy, the soul, for lack of a better word, could be severed from the body and observed, leaving a psychic scar on the environment. He used the ER as his private lab. His victims were the most vulnerable, the homeless, the transients, the John Does. People no one would miss. His notes were chillingly clinical. He'd bring them to bed 13, his observation chamber, and under the guise of treatment, he would induce cardiac arrest. He would murder them, all to catch a glimpse of the soul leaving the body. The code blue wasn't a glitch. The phantom in the machine wasn't a ghost. It was an echo, the final, desperate moments of Finch's victims, imprinted on the very room where they died, playing back over and over. I felt sick. I found another file, an internal review from 1979. The hospital board knew. They knew everything. But Finch's unorthodox methods had also led to breakthroughs that brought the hospital prestige and money. The decision was made: seal the records, protect the legacy. Then I found the last folder. It held a report written by a nurse named Eleanor Vance, a courageous expose of Finch's experiments and the cover-up. She'd found the truth. The last page was a letter to the chief of police, dated April 12, 1980. Tucked behind it was her resignation letter, dated the very next day. The signature was a clumsy forgery. She never made it to the police. The hospital hadn't just covered up murders, they'd committed one more. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, my blood turning to ice. Dr. Evans stood in the opening, the two large security guards behind him. He looked calm, almost disappointed. "I knew you were too curious for your own good, Leo," he said softly. Just like Eleanor, he glanced at the open footlocker. He sighed. "Dr. Finch was a brilliant man," Evans said, his tone conversational. "A pioneer. His work brought this hospital into the modern age. The cost was regrettable, but progress always has a cost. Those people," he gestured vaguely, "they were nobodies, a contribution to a greater good." He was admitting it, right to my face. calmly justifying serial murder as the price of prestige. "And Eleanor?" I whispered. Evans's face hardened. Eleanor Vance was a sentimental fool. She couldn't see the bigger picture. She chose to become a loose end. We can't have loose ends. He looked at me, his eyes empty of morality. And now, here you are. Another loose end. You can walk out of here, forget everything you saw, and disappear from our lives. Or, you can simply disappear. The guard stepped forward. The secret of St. Jude's wasn't a ghost. It was a conspiracy. And I was their next problem to solve. In that split second, it was fight or flight. There was no fighting them, so I chose flight. Before they could move, I grabbed a handful of the most damning pages, Finch's journal, his notes, Eleanor Vance's report, and shoved them in my scrubs. Then I kicked the heavy footlocker as hard as I could into Evans's shins. He cried out, stumbling back. That was all I needed. I scrambled out of the hole, sprinted past the guards, and ran. I ran like my life depended on it, because it did. I burst out of the side door into the blinding sun, alarms blaring behind me. I didn't go back to my apartment. I just drove, for 12 hours straight. I spent weeks in cheap motels, paying cash, looking over my shoulder, convinced that any shadow could be a man in a suit sent to tie up a loose end. I eventually mailed copies of the pages I took to an investigative reporter, along with everything that happened. I don't know if the story will ever come out. An institution like St. Jude's has powerful friends and decades of experience making problems disappear. I had to disappear myself, leaving my career, my entire life behind. I don't work as a nurse anymore. I can't. I can't walk into a hospital without seeing the ghosts that linger, not just in the machines, but in the smiling portraits of decorated surgeons on the walls. The haunting of St. Jude's ER wasn't about a restless spirit. It was about the indelible stain of human cruelty. The echoes weren't a curse. They were a cry for justice from victims whose lives were erased by the men sworn to save them. The real horror wasn't the ghost in bed 13. It was discovering that the people in charge knew and would kill to protect their secret. The most terrifying thing in that hospital wasn't the dead, it was the living. It makes me wonder, how many other hospitals have a bed 13? How many other stories like this are out there, just dismissed as exhaustion or superstition? If you've ever witnessed something you just can't explain, especially in a place where life and death are so close, share your story in the comments. Maybe we can't expose every secret, but telling our stories is the one thing they can't take from us. It proves we were there. It proves we saw what we saw. If you want to hear more stories that explore the darkness hiding in plain sight, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Stay safe out there, and never let them tell you what you saw wasn't real.